Welcome to Osgoode Professional Development's pre-recorded guide to the NCA accreditation process. At Osgoode Professional Development, we're a division of Osgoode Hall Law School, and we offer a number of programs that can help NCA candidates get through their accreditation process. If you're at the beginning of this journey, please watch this video closely to understand your options. I'd like to start with a really important advisory. The information in this presentation is current as of April 2016, and because we'll be covering regulatory information, we need to ask you to please review on your own at your leisure the NCA as well as the Provincial Law Society websites, policies, and procedures very carefully, as you're governed by them as a regulated person and will need to understand how those policies apply to you. This presentation is really intended as an overview of how the NCA process works, some typical assessments, as well as some options that we have for you here at Osgoode Professional Development. What we'll be covering in the presentation today is 4 items. If you already have your NCA assessment and you're wondering how to complete the requirements, you can skip to the end of the presentation and watch the 4th item. The first part of the presentation will cover how you become accredited, so a slight overview of how the process works. Then how to get an NCA assessment, then what your NCA assessment means in terms of how you can meet the requirements, and then finally how you can complete the requirements in terms of options of taking courses or writing challenge exams. So first of all, the NCA process. For those of you who aren't familiar yet with the National Committee on Accreditation, it's a body of the Federation of Law Societies of Canada, and it's responsible for assessing the credentials of all internationally trained lawyers. So anyone who went to law school outside of Canada or in a civil law school in Canada who's interested in getting accredited to practice common law in Canada. So your first step to understanding how to become licensed is to embark on the process of getting an NCA assessment. Now, to get an NCA assessment, you do need to have completed your law degree, and you need to have final law school transcripts available showing that your degree has been conferred. If you are still in school, perhaps in your final year of a law degree program, you can think about applying to a graduate program during that final year, and you can also get prepared to submit your documentation to the NCA. In many cases, the NCA recommends that you submit all of the other documentation, so all of your CV and other documentation that's required for the assessment, during your final term of law school, and then as soon as your final transcripts are available, so right after your graduation, you would submit the final transcripts. We'll cover in the next section of the presentation some typical assessments that the NCA issues depending on where you went to school. But this is the basics of the process. So you do need to have completed law school and had your degree conferred in order to get an assessment. And what that also means is that you will need to obtain a final official transcript from your law school no matter how long ago you attended law school. So for some of you, this process may take a bit of time, so it's important to embark on the process as early as possible if you are planning to become accredited in Canada. So let's go through some typical NCA assessments. Now again, it's important to review the policies. The link is here on the website for you. And what we're covering today is the most common assessments that we see here in our program at Osgoode Professional Development. The way the NCA's assessment process works, they have 5 mandatory subjects, 4 core subjects, and then a number of additional subjects that they assess people on. So the minimum assessment is the 5 mandatory subjects, which we call the 5 Canadians. Foundations of Canadian Law, Canadian Criminal Law, Canadian Administrative Law, Canadian Constitutional Law, and Canadian Professional Responsibility. Now those 5 subjects will be assessed regardless of where you went to school, the quality of your education, the amount of professional experience you may have. The 4 core subjects everyone is assessed on, and generally if you took a law degree in a common law jurisdiction where you've taken those 4 subjects in full courses and achieved a final mark that is more than 5% above a pass mark, you would get credit for those subjects. So those subjects are contracts, torts, property, and business organizations or corporate law. And so many candidates coming in from UK law schools, from the US, and from similar jurisdictions would have satisfied those 4 core subjects. And then the additional subjects are given sometimes to compensate for a shorter than 3-year law degree. So many people will do 2-year graduate entry programs. If you don't have a previous degree before you went to law school, you may be assessed additional subjects and so on. So the typical assessments for the most common jurisdictions that we see here at OsgoodePD, first of all, if you have a law degree from a common law jurisdiction, generally people are assessed somewhere between the minimum of 5 and about 8 subjects. And that depends on the factors I mentioned earlier. Do you have an undergraduate degree? Did you do a 3-year law degree or a 2-year law degree? What was your academic performance, and which subjects did you study in your law degree? People from hybrid jurisdictions, so those would be jurisdictions such as Israel or the Philippines, usually those are around 8 or 9 subjects. If you have a distance education law degree from a common law jurisdiction, so that means you did not study for at least 2 years in person during your law degree, the current NCA policy requires that you do the equivalent of 2 years of full-time in-person study in Canada. So that's a very onerous requirement for distance education degrees. The reason for that policy is it brings the NCA policy in line with the Federation of Law Societies policy for Canadian law schools, which are also required to have at least 2 years of in-person study in a law degree program in Canada. For civil law jurisdictions, generally the NCA will not issue an assessment. At this point, they are generally issuing a letter stating the 5 mandatory and 4 core subjects that civil law lawyers are required to take. But again, it's not an assessment. You do generally need to go to school to take at least some of those courses, or take a program that has significant common law content so that you can then get an assessment and then go on to complete the remainder of the 9 subjects that you haven't already done. For Canadian civil law graduates, generally up to 7 subjects in the assessment, and those are set out in a specific section of the NCA assessment policy. And finally, there are some candidates who can't get an assessment from the NCA, even if they've gone to a common law school, and generally that's due to poor overall academic performance in their law degree, so they've achieved a bare pass or a 3rd class overall degree, or they've attended a law school that is not accredited in the home jurisdiction. And we'll talk about what that means in terms of steps that you might take to get assessed later in this presentation. So once you have an assessment, or in the case of people who don't have an assessment, what do you do? So first of all, you want to read the assessment quite carefully, because again, this is going to govern your relationship with the NCA. Read the assessment and read it in conjunction with the NCA's policies. It will set out the subjects you're required to complete. It will give you a deadline, which is usually 5 years from the assessment date, and it will give you options. And so for most candidates, you have the option of either taking exams, challenge exams with the NCA itself, or you can take some courses. For other candidates, you'll be required to do in-person study. And of course, if you don't have an assessment, so you're from a civil law jurisdiction or you've been refused an assessment for academic or other reasons, probably your only option would be to complete at least some courses in the common law area and then perhaps get an assessment down the road. So if your assessment gives you the option to write exams or take courses, then you have options. You can simply write the challenge exams with the NCA. Those are run between 2 and 4 times a year. You can prepare for them on your own using the syllabus and reading material that's set out by the NCA on their website. And many candidates do this on their own. If you attack the process aggressively, if you have somewhere between 5 and 8 subjects, you might complete those in 1, 2, or 3 sittings perhaps, so it can be done fairly quickly. The other option would be to use a preparatory course or some of the other supports such as tutors who are out in the market. At OsgoodePD, we do offer prep courses for the 5 mandatory subjects. Those are online prep courses. There are other providers in the market. It's important to research those options carefully and make sure that if you're going to spend money on a tutor or a course, that you feel you're going to get good value from that investment. Your other option would be to take courses, and you can do that at Osgoode and at many of the other law schools in Canada in a number of ways. So the first way would be to take single courses, and we offer that option through our LLM here at Osgoode Professional Development. There's a limit of 12 credits for single courses, and so most of our courses being 6-credit courses, generally for most people that's 2 courses that they could take through single courses. Why would people choose to do that? Well, perhaps there are 1 or 2 subjects that they really want to learn more in depth because of their professional interests, or perhaps they are concerned about passing the exam in 1 or 2 subjects with the NCA, so they may opt to take single course enrollment. Again, recall that does have the 12 credit maximum, and that's a lifetime maximum. So if you were to want to do more than those 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 courses, depending on the credit value, you would need to be looking at an LLM program. And the primary one that people would look at here at Osgoode Professional Development to complete all of their NCA requirements is the LLM in Canadian Common Law. And I would certainly stop at this point in the presentation to say that we run information sessions, both online and in person, on a very regular basis here at OsgoodePD. And so if you are interested in one of our academic or non-credit options, we would really recommend that you sign up for our next session. They are run at least once a month and often twice a month. And those are on the information sessions page on our website, which is osgoodepd.ca. The third option at Osgoode would be to apply to be an NCA special student in the JD program, and that would give you access to up to the number of courses that you need for your assessment. But at Osgoode, you would only get access to upper year courses, so those would be courses such as business associations and administrative law. That application process is just once a year. The deadline is in May. And the final option would be, of course, to combine exams and courses. So we see many students, again, who are taking perhaps 1 or 2 single courses and completing the challenge exams for the remaining subjects on their own. Now, if your assessment requires you to take courses, then you would consider the course options that are available. So again, LLM, single course, or an NCA special student. It's going to depend, obviously, how many courses you need and how much time commitment you want to make, and so on. So for candidates who are from civil law jurisdictions, our single course option does require an NCA assessment as part of the application process. So generally for candidates from civil law jurisdictions, you would want to look at applying to an LLM program. and completing at least some of the core or mandatory subjects in order to get an assessment. If you are coming in from a common law jurisdiction and you have an NCA assessment, for example, you are a distance education graduate, then you would probably want to look at LLM programs because you need a longer period of study. But again, it's possible to combine different options together to get the amount of in-person study that you may need. So you may need to think creatively, look at the deadlines for applications for the various options, and perhaps apply to more than one option so that you've maximized your chances of getting access to in-person study. If the NCA has refused you an assessment for one of the two most common reasons, the first being you have a law degree but it's not an accredited law degree, and the second being poor academic performance, you likely do need to embark on some kind of program of study. If you don't have an accredited law degree, then you likely need to go back to law school here in Canada and get an LLB or JD degree. But we would certainly recommend that anyone who's been refused an assessment from the NCA seek guidance directly from the regulator to find out what your best option is, because you want to ensure that if you're going to invest additional time and resources in studying, that you would make sure that the option you're pursuing will be recognized by the NCA. If you've been refused recognition because of poor academic performance, generally, again, you would need to do some more courses or perhaps another degree, a graduate degree in law, so an LLM of some sort, and then potentially get an assessment if your academic performance is improved in that further program of study. But again, it's really important to seek guidance from the NCA. The one thing to consider quite carefully in either of these situations is that you may not be particularly competitive for LLM programs if you're coming in with an unaccredited law degree or with poor academic performance. So you'll want to consider what else you can do in terms of building your resume, in terms of demonstrating your ability to succeed in a graduate program before you apply. Because many of the LLM programs in Canada are quite competitive for admission, you want to make yourself as strong as you can before you apply. You could, of course, also think about single course options if you're looking to get some additional in-person time. And then at OsgoodePD, we have an option called the Pre-LLM Foundations Program, and that's a program that many students are pursuing to improve their academic skills, improve their understanding of foundational Canadian law in order to get ready for a graduate degree program. So those are the options you might consider if you are in the situation of having had an assessment refused. We hope that you found that presentation quite helpful in terms of understanding the overview of the NCA process, the typical assessments. Again, we would certainly recommend that people read their assessments closely, read the NCA policies. They are quite clearly set out, and it's important to understand those as a candidate. It's also very important to look at the licensing process policies of whichever provincial law society where you're planning to get accredited to practice, so that you can understand the timelines and all of the remaining regulatory process. Those are supports we also provide to students in our programs, and so we would welcome any of you who are interested in applying to do so. And the information on your screen for further questions after you've reviewed this presentation is for our International Admissions and Programs Coordinator, and we would welcome inquiries about your own specific circumstances. If you do call or email, we have a 2 business day turnaround time for responses, so please do call, leave a voicemail message with details, or send a detailed email message. We will reply to you within 2 business days. Thanks very much for your attention.